To shed some light on India's latest rape case, I spoke earlier with Jacqueline Bhabha from Harvard University's School of Public Health. And with the outrage that followed the bus incident last year, I asked her why this is still happening and whether a death penalty sentence will be enough.
Evidence of rape has increased since the December 16th, 2012 rape in New Delhi that hit the headlines and provoked outrage. I think we know that the numbers of rape cases reported have doubled in New Delhi, and the numbers of sexual harassment reports have, I think, gone up by a factor of 10. Now, this probably also reflects gross underreporting before, but there's no doubt that sexual violence is certainly not at an end in India. So despite the concern, despite some changes in the law, there's still a very, very serious issue about gender-based violence in India.
Do you think the country's new prime minister can bring about some real reform with this issue? There was a record-setting voter turnout just a few weeks ago, yet rape and women's issues were not high on the agenda of election issues.
No, and actually women's safety and women's protection has not been an issue that this new prime minister has shown much interest in his own state. There have been very serious incidents against women over the years when he was chief minister, which is like governor of the state. So his record is not great on that. So I think, you know, it's still very early days, of course. He was only elected, as you say, 2 weeks ago, so it's too early to criticize him as prime minister. But I don't think there's a huge amount of optimism about that. I think the other point is that change from top down is only one aspect of what needs to happen, and that certainly does need to happen. There need to be much better enforcement of the laws. There needs to be much better training and support of police officers. There needs to be much better incentives for police officers and law enforcement agencies, particularly in rural areas like the one where these rapes happened, to actually implement the laws. So just having harsh punishment, having the occasional sentence of death penalty is really not going to change the situation for millions of women. But I think the other thing is that bottom-up changes are also critical. So changes in how girls and women are perceived, changes in the way in which adolescent and sex education are taught in schools, just approaching the topic of gender as something that's not shameful or scandalous, but something that's part of an education is really a critical move. And I think people, some of the organizations in India have been trying to advocate for this for years, but there's still a lot of resistance.
Talking about bottom up, with all the protests and the public outrage, the demonstrations that were taking place last year, why wasn't it evident in the voting?
Well, I think there are various things to be said. Firstly, to be honest, I don't think there was a very strong candidate, a women's rights, if you like, or a candidate that really had women's rights or sort of gender protection issues at the top of their agenda. So the alternative to this this outcome was not a strong one. But I think it's also true that in different parts of the country there are different approaches. So the state in which these rapes took place, Uttar Pradesh, which is the largest state, I think it has a population of about 120 million people, so you get a sense of the scale. This state has very rigid caste divisions. It has very, very big disparities in wealth. It's very traditional. I was there only a few months ago, and it's very evident that low-caste communities, particularly low-caste girls and women, are really very much at the bottom of a steep hierarchy. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this case that I just gather from the news reports is that the girls were actually caught while they were relieving themselves. So they were actually defecating in the open. Why? Because there's no access to safe sanitation. And so what happens is that women, girls and women in many of these rural areas have to go out to the fields either early in the morning or late at night when most people aren't around in order to get some privacy. And so, of course, that's hugely dangerous. So I think that's another critical aspect of safety and of health and sanitation for women, that if you don't have access to toilets, you don't have access to safe sanitation facilities, then, especially the low-caste women who are in that position are at huge risk. So this is not, unfortunately, an uncommon situation.
All right, Jacqueline Bhabha, thank you so much for joining us from Harvard University.